We do like 15
Please.
minutes, so should I give you like a few minutes,
Yeah.
like a little warning? Okay, perfect. I'll just have my phone just to keep eye on time. And with that, the meeting is over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Sutton, I'm an addict.
That's it.
Yeah, thank you for asking me to be a service, and yeah, thanks to all of you for being here, and yeah, before I start, if there's anyone new, welcome, welcome to NA, welcome to the meeting, and yeah, I still get nervous when I get asked to do shares, I find it quite nerve-wracking, sitting at the front, facing people, getting honest about what's going on for me, but it's something that's like necessary for my recovery, and it's something that I've learned to do, when I get asked to do it. Yeah, I'm a bit conscious about the recording as well, because it's like I feel like I've got to censor out like how weird I am. Like I don't want that shit to be recorded on YouTube. You know what I mean? Like, in case it comes back and bites me in the arse. But in all seriousness, I'm here because I'm an addict. That's why I'm here. I'm here because I can't control my use of drugs. I can't use drugs successfully. And I guess I'm also here because I don't know how to live life successfully. That's why I'm here. And that's what leads me back to the drugs every time. And I had, I've been in Narcotics Anonymous for over 4 years. I had 4 years clean, and then I ended up relapsing. I relapsed for a night, and I'm now 40-something days, 41, 42 days back. And yeah, I'm gonna start with, sort of how I got here, but I'm not gonna go too much on my previous experience of the steps. I'm gonna talk more about my current understanding of step one that I've just worked now, and I remember from a young kid, I had a good upbringing, in the sense of the outside stuff. I came from a decent home. On the outside, everything was fine. There was no addiction in my family. There was no problems externally. I got sent to a good school. Had education, had clothes, had food to eat. Had good parents. That's my story. That's where I came from. And that might not be everybody's story in here. But the thing is like, despite all of that, I still ended up where I ended up. I still ended up in addiction. And what I remember about my upbringing is like, I always felt uncomfortable and uneasy inside my own skin. That's my experience growing up. I always felt a deep sense of anxiety, a deep sense of restlessness, of unworthiness, finding it hard to fit in, finding it hard to make friends. Things like going to school, I found that very difficult. I was always getting in trouble, couldn't fit in, couldn't make friends, didn't feel good enough, felt isolated, separated, less than, all that kind of stuff. And it's like I found drugs as a coping mechanism when I was 14. Someone passed me a spliff. That was my first experience of getting high. And I remember since that first high, I just wanted that feeling. Every day I just chased that feeling. I was just chasing that feeling. And I remember smoking that spliff. But before going in there, feeling anxious, resentful, full of self, discontent, all that stuff, and then having this spliff, and I just remember just laughing and just feeling free, and it was from that moment, I just continued to use every day. That's my experience. And I progressed through all the drugs. I started with cannabis. Went on to other stuff. I'm not going to name all of them, but I went up the ladder. Ended up on the class A's. And that was my experience. And for a while, drugs seemed to do, they did the job. They did what I wanted them to do. They made me feel really happy, like really content. I loved getting high. I really loved getting high. I did. And then it got to the point where that drug started creating problems in my life. Serious problems. The drugs I was taking. I was stealing from my family. Degrading myself. I was becoming abusive. To people who I loved. Very abusive. I was manipulative. I was dishonest. Getting kicked out of school in my last year, hanging around drug dealers, people that were no good for me, committing crime, doing all sorts of things that I shouldn't have been doing to maintain that addiction, especially like, the most shame that I felt, throughout my addiction was the way that I was treating my family, especially my mother, stealing from her, become verbally abusive, even physically abusive to my little brother, Like the things that I did to maintain my addiction. There was times where I'd be crying. I'd be crying whilst going into the cupboard and stealing the money. I'd be crying. I didn't want to do it, but I felt I had no choice. I felt powerless. And I remember, from the age of 16, I was engaging with drug and alcohol services. In Ealing, where I was growing up. Acton, Ealing. I was engaging with the drug counsellors, and I'd be trying all these things to try and get clean. My family would be taking me to psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists. I tried ADHD medication because I received a diagnosis of ADHD. He'd give me these pills like Ritalin, like slow release, then the instant release, and I'd get like a month's supply, like 6 pills a day, 180 pills, and I thought this was going to sort me out. And in the beginning it calmed me down, but then what I'd do is I'd go into the cupboard, I'd take all of the pills for the month, crush them all up and sniff them, they'd be gone in 3 days, you know what I mean? I had a minute of sleep. So medication didn't work for me. I remember, being locked up inside the house, begging to my mum, being brought back by police at 2 a.m, off my face on benzodiazepines, and I'd be crying to my mum, I'd be saying, please take this phone, lock me in, I don't want to do this anymore, do you know what I mean? And I remember I'd be sneaking out at 2 a.m, stealing money. I remember times I jumped out of the first floor window in my bathrobe and my fucking Crocs to go and use. Do you know what I mean? Knocked over the tree in the garden. Could have broken my ankles, could have broken my legs. That didn't stop me. I was that desperate to use. I would do anything and anything to get drugs. Because I didn't like the feeling of being sober, being clean. I went to Greece, for 3 months. And again, I've been 4 weeks to being in Greece. I'm clean physically. But I feel so crazy inside, I feel so crazy inside my head that I'm stood on the balcony, screaming and shouting on the phone to an ex-partner who broke up with me because of my addiction, calling her all names under the sun, my head thumping, feeling like I'm going to explode and have a psychotic episode at 4 weeks clean, in a beautiful place in the suburbs in Greece. And I'm wondering if I'm clean, why is this happening? If my problems are drugs, why is this happening? And I went and got on the phone to a psychiatrist, got more medication, ADHD meds, and was crushing them up, stealing them out my grandmother's purse and sniffing them in her flat and then drinking her booze. And again, I tried rehabs as well, went to rehabs at the age of 19. I'd get a couple months clean, I'd relapse. I'd come out, I'd relapse, because I thought the drugs were my problem. And, eventually I got introduced to NA, for the first time at the age of 20, I think it was 20, I was 20, and I came in and, what I found was I started to experience the benefits of the program. For me, my experience was that I was told to do certain things when I came in, was given the suggestions, which was get a sponsor, get to meetings regularly, I did them every day, work the steps, do service, get numbers, call them, pray, do a gratitude list, do an inventory, and I made that my way of life, and I quickly found that by doing that stuff, my life began to change dramatically. The desire to use drugs, it was very, very quickly lifted from me. That was my experience. I started, my behaviour started to change. As I got through the steps last time, I started to feel better about myself. I built some self-esteem. I addressed a lot of the underlying fears and the trauma stuff that led to my addiction. I came back to London, did an undergraduate degree, finished that successfully. Things were going good. And in the first 3 years of my recovery, I would say I had very, very strong recovery. I had really good recovery the first 3 years. But then what happened to me was, and I got all the information as well. I got an understanding of, that's step one, which I'm going to go into. I got all the information. I understood what addiction was. I understood it was nothing to do with the drugs. I understood it was about me, my thinking, obsession, compulsion, self-centeredness, fear, denial, rationalization, all that stuff, unmanageability. I got understanding of all of that. And I applied it for the first 3 years and my life changed, it got better. But see what happened to me when I got to about 3 years, 2.5, 3 years clean, I got hit with a problem. Life on life's terms showed up and I got hit with a health problem, which affected all of my joints, my muscles, my nerves, every system in my body's been affected by this thing, do you know what I mean? And what happened to me is I started, without realising it, I started withdrawing from recovery because I became so obsessed with trying to manage this problem and trying to figure it out and solve this, trying to solve this problem and figure out what it was. Running to all the doctors, doing research on my own, couldn't get a clear answer, and I found myself pulling away from this stuff. First a meeting started to drop, and then, then it was the step work. I wasn't really engaging, and then it was phone calls and reaching out and all that stuff. And it got me to a place where, I was 3 years clean and I'm sat on my own in my flat. I've pulled out of uni again by this point. I was doing a master's, I pulled out of it. And I'm sat on my own in my flat all day long, in my underpants, on the sofa, feeling suicidal, clean. You know, and this went on for about a year. And then, I got to my 4-year mark, and then what happened was, I was unhappy. Like, that year was I'd say that year was probably the toughest year of my life, like tougher than the using, tougher than anything. Being clean, having an awareness of the program, understanding it. I was taking someone through the steps at this time. I'm being asked to do chairs, and I remember I'm telling people to do all of these things, but then I'm not doing it. Do you know what I mean? I'm still running around trying to manage the fucking health problem on my own. And it's like the disease is smart. You see, the disease of addiction is progressive, right? Even during abstinence, yeah? So it's like, as I'm learning all this terminology and doing all this step work and doing this sponsorship and telling my sponsee what to do, and the disease has learned all that language. Do you know what I mean? It knows everything in that basic text that I've read. My disease has read it with me. It knows it. You know what I mean? It knows all the step work. It got to a point where, like, you could ask me, "Stop, come here, do a share on step 6," and I could give you a brilliant share on step 6, fucking regurgitating whatever I've memorized from my step work and the basic text, and I can make all of you think I'm amazing and I'm doing all right. But then inside I'm dying. Like, inside I want to kill myself and I want to kill everyone else as well. Like, that's how I'm feeling. And it was just a painful place, man. And I remember, like, a few weeks before I picked up, I went on a date with this girl, right? She was from the rooms, not blowing anyone's anonymity, so I can say that, you know what I mean? She was quite new in, she came on to me, gave me a bit of attention and that, and we ended up going on a date, basically. And my obsession came in, like, my fantasy. I've just met this girl. In my head, it's like I've been in a 5-year relationship with this girl. Do you know what I mean? I already, it's crazy. And then I end up going there with these expectations. These expectations aren't met. My behaviour is too strong, whatever. And then I end up getting rejected. And then I'm just sat there feeling even more suicidal in my flat, acknowledged. And then I end up using. So what happens is, one night, I'm on the phone to a sponsee. I've walked to the corner shop to buy cigarettes. I've walked out with a 4-pack of beer. I drank those beers, I'm back at the shop in 10 minutes. And then before you know it, I'm in Whitechapel smoking heroin and crack all night, just like that. And this is the power of the illness that I suffer from, man. It doesn't matter how long you've been clean, doesn't matter what you know. If you don't apply the program, it doesn't work. You are going to use. And, people could say that to me. I could sit here and say that to you. But now I've got that experience, like, it's happened to me. Do you know what I mean? Thank God, I was extremely fortunate and very lucky that the next morning, for whatever reason, I prayed. I said, I had the money on the table, I had the guy on his way to meet me, and I just prayed. I was like, God, please, help me not to use anymore. Just remove this obsession. And he just removed it, just like that. I had to call the guy, cancelled, said don't come, and then I just went to the convention and got my white key ring and just re-surrendered to the program, doing the same things every day that got me to the good 3 years that I had before. And it's like, looking through the step 1 this time, step 1 says we admitted that we were powerless over our addiction, that our lives had become unmanageable. The step 1 that I wrote now, even though there was basically very little mention of drugs in that step 1. Very little mention of drugs. It was all about the disease. Like, for me, the painful part of my relapse wasn't the using itself. The using was the relief. It was the solution. The painful part of my relapse was the year leading up to me getting to that point of picking up. That's what it was. And I saw, that obsession, where one thought overrides all other thought. That thought with my health problems and wanting a solution for this, it overrid every other thought of my responsibilities, of my recovery, of my uni, of my life, everything. It got me to a prisoner, the same way I used to sit on my own in my flat, thinking, how am I going to get £10 to get another bit of drugs? It's the same thing. I'm sat there on ChatGPT and fucking Reddit trying to figure out how I'm going to solve this health problem. Do you know what I mean? And the compulsion, that physical fucking urge to act out. Like, I'm downloading the app, I'm re-downloading it. Same thing with the girls come up. I've deleted her number. I've then recovered the number off the fucking deleted contacts. I'm then thinking, do I send another message? Do I not? I'm writing the message out. I'm deleting it. It's fucking crazy behaviour. You know what I mean? I'm taking this girl that I don't know on a date. I'm spending like fucking £100 on a fucking date on someone I don't know. Like, crazy behaviour, man. Do you know what I mean? It's, sending messages, fucking, like, this is crazy behaviour. Do you know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't act like this in recovery. Do you know what I mean? And I can go into so many examples. But I ain't got time. I'm running out. We've got like 2 minutes or something, haven't I? So, okay, now that time goes fast, man. And then there was a question that said, it asked me about obsessions, yeah, and it said, how does it affect you mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually when I'm in obsession? And it didn't matter what the obsession was, yeah. It didn't matter whether it was about the gym, didn't matter whether it was about health, didn't matter whether it was about a girl, didn't matter whether it was about food, it doesn't matter what it is, it gets me to the same place, where spiritually I feel disconnected from myself and others because I can't think about anything other than that obsession. Mentally, I feel trapped and I feel suicidal. Physically I feel ill, it affects my health. When I'm in obsession, it affects me physically. Like I'm not sleeping, I'm not eating, I'm smoking cigarettes, I'm indoors, I'm not getting fresh air. And emotionally, I just want to die, man. That's how I feel when I'm in that. And it's like, so it's the same thing that used to happen with the drugs, like that thought to use drugs. When I get the obsession, I couldn't stop myself. I'm acting on it. Physically now I'm using, I'm fucked. Mentally I want to kill myself. Emotionally I want to kill myself. It's the same thing. And it's like, what step one showed me is that my problem isn't a drug or a specific substance. My problem isn't the health stuff. My problem isn't the gym. It isn't uni. It isn't money. It isn't work. It isn't sex. It isn't women. It's nothing. My problem, whatever's going on in my life, my biggest problem is me, is my disease of addiction. Even if I get told tomorrow I've got a terminal illness and I'm going to die, my biggest problem isn't the illness. My biggest problem is the addiction. Because if I don't deal with the addiction, I don't have the ability to face and deal with that problem. I can't, because my thinking is so mashed up that I will be trying to solve that problem through obsession, compulsion, self-centeredness, manipulation, denial. And what will happen is, I don't even get my fucking needs met. I get the opposite of what I'm looking for. And I'm going to finish on this. Fast forward to 10 days after my relapse, work in a program every day. I then go and see a doctor in Kent, yeah? And I tell him about what's going on. Bear in mind, I've spent about the last year and a half seeing about 20 different doctors, and all of them scratching their heads saying, we don't know what the fuck's going on. Yeah, so I see this one doctor, and he just lists every single thing that I want, that could have been wrong with me, that I was trying to get tested for the last 2 years that no one listened to. He just gone bam and just listed it on his own, ordered all these tests, like without any intervention from my part. And that for me shows the difference between my addiction, between acting in self-will and my addiction and using the program. You see, step one tells me that I'm powerless over addiction, that my life's unmanageable. I don't know how to manage my life. I can't manage my thinking. I don't know how to feel about things. I don't know how to act. I can't deal with responsibilities. That's why I'm here, man. Do you know what I mean? I need the program to help me with all these areas. But listen, my time is up. I've probably gone over, so I'm going to leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks.